Welcome back, everyone. Spring and summer is a time for new growth and taking bold action together. So we hope these stories can inspire you to live boldly, take wise chances, and with our friends and family, make a difference together. Today we will be reading The Adventures of Wishbone, Digging to the Center of the Earth by Michael Anthony Steele, inspired by A Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. So lean in with a spirit of adventure, grab a friend, and let's enjoy the story together. Chapter 2. Wishbone sat next to the fresh mound of dirt and peered once again into the freshly dug hole. He imagined himself to be the very well-educated Professor Lindenbrock, running down a village road on his way home with something very special. Tail wagging, Professor Lindenbrock trotted through the seaport village of Hamburg. The little town was full of all the sights and sounds of transatlantic ocean trade. Seagulls shrieked overhead as cargo was loaded onto and off the many tall ships safely anchored in the harbor. But all of this activity was shut out of the professor's mind. On this day, May 24th, 1863, his mind was focused only on returning home. The brisk salt air chilled his whiskers, but he kept up his quick pace. People he knew greeted him as he passed, but he kept on going. The cobblestones on the street were hard against his soft paws, but he paid little attention to the ground underneath him. It seemed that the professor couldn't get home fast enough, for in his mouth he held a most incredible discovery. His teeth gently grasped an aged and yellowing book. The professor loved to collect old books, although this one probably held little value to anyone else. It was especially important to him. It was from Iceland, an island country in the far North Atlantic Ocean, whose culture and history were one of the professor's favorite topics of study. Even more important, the book was written in runic, the original language of Iceland itself. It was a language that was spoken between the 4th and 14th centuries. Professor Lindenbrock knew that the book must tell of some treasure, some unknown fact, or some important data that only he would be able to decode from the ancient text. Although he spoke many languages, runic was not one of them. He couldn't wait to get home and begin translating it. He knew that his nephew, Axel, would probably not be as thrilled over this remarkable find as he was. Still, he couldn't wait to show it to him. Professor Lindenbrock cared deeply for Axel. The young man had been living with the professor and studying under his guidance for some time now. The professor was beginning to realize that Axel was an excellent student, as well as a fine scientist in his own right. The professor was also very much pleased that his nephew's passion lay in the same field of science that he himself so loved, geology, the study of the development of the different layers of the Earth's crust. Although Axel wasn't always as enthusiastic about the subject as Lindenbrock was, I don't think anyone could be as enthusiastic as Lindenbrock about anything, but that's right. The professor still encouraged his nephew's thirst for knowledge. He also involved his nephew in everything that he did. Professor Lindenbrock saw a young version of himself every time he looked at Axel. The professor arrived at his front gate. He trotted through the always open entryway to his yard. It was always open because the gate hung awkwardly by only one hinge. Been like that for many years, with no hope of repair. Who had time to repair a gate when there were great scientific discoveries to be made and unusual rock specimens to study and label? The professor trotted up the front walk. He went past the grand oak tree that stood in the front yard, proceeded up the ivory-coated cottage that was his and his nephew's home. Upon reaching the front door, he pushed it open with his front paws. The professor entered the house, tail wagging with excitement. "Abdul, Abdul, dear boy," he called with a bit of difficulty. "Oh. Abdul, dear boy. Abdul, come here at once." The professor ran up the stairs towards the study. As he climbed the stairs, he heard from the dining room the clink of silverware against porcelain, then the clomping footsteps of his nephew. I must have interrupted Axel's dinner, the professor thought as he walked through the study's doorway. No matter, he must come and see this incredible book. Professor Lindenbrock shook off his hat and hopped into a chair next to a table. The table was littered with all the necessary tools of the serious geologist, books, various picks, mallets, and magnifying glasses, and rocks. There were plenty of rocks, all in various stages of being tested, labeled, and classified. As he brushed aside some of the clutter with his paws, dust filled the air. All the tiny particles were immediately spotlighted by the warm rays of the setting sun. The amber light shone through the window and up and onto the museum of catalog specimens that made up the professor's study. He set down the ancient book and adjusted his spectacles. Then quickly but carefully he leafed through it. "Wonderful," he cried, his paw turning another page. "Wonderful, wonderful!" Axel stepped into the study and came over to the table. He was clearly curious about the cause for such a commotion. He should be used to it by now, I would think, but that's okay. "What have you found, Uncle?" he asked. He looked up at his tall, nice-looking nephew. A napkin still tucked into his shirt collar proved the professor's theory of the unfinished dinner downstairs. "Axel, my boy," the professor replied, "this book is a true and correct account of the Norwegian princes who ruled the island of Iceland. I'm sure it will give us some never-before-revealed information on the subject." Axel showed a small bit of enthusiasm, but Professor Lindenbrock knew his nephew was just trying to make him happy. Wonderful, Uncle, Axel said. The volume is translated into German, I hope. Absolutely not, his uncle replied, a bit annoyed by the idea. I wouldn't pay a penny for a plain old translation. He turned another page. This is written in Runic, the original Icelandic language. This is what makes a book so valuable to me. More often than not, bad translations change many of the names and confuse the facts. He motioned with his nose for Axel to take a closer look. Axel reached over and picked up the open book. When he turned it around to look at it more closely, a small scrap of paper fell to the table. It's so old, it's falling apart, Uncle, Axel said jokingly. But the professor didn't think this remark was a joke. He seized the small scrap in his mouth before it hit the table, set it down in front of him, and looked it over. No, Axel, it seems that this piece of parchment is not as old as the book itself, but the writing on it is also in Runic. I don't know if you can see this picture, but it's so cute. With his little glasses. Good. Can you see it? Yeah. So cute. Little glasses, little bow tie. It's adorable. A small scrap measured about 5 by 3 inches. Professor Lindenbrock examined it carefully. He suddenly became more excited. Axel, he cried, I believe this note must have been written by the previous owner of this text. Quickly, search through the manuscript. Professor said, his tail wagging excitedly. Perhaps by great good luck, the person's name will be written somewhere inside the volume. Axel picked up a magnifying glass and began to flip through the pages of the ancient book. His search was brief. Here, Uncle. He turned the book around and pointed to a faded, almost unreadable inscription written on the flyleaf, the blank sheet at the beginning of the book. With the professor's keen eyesight, he made out the name. Arni Sagnusson! Arni Sagnusson! He cried in joyous but thrilled tone. That is not only an Icelandic name, but the name of a very wise professor of the 16th century! Professor's tail wagged quickly. Arne Sagnusson was a famous scientist who made several important discoveries while looking for ways to change metals such as mercury or lead into gold. He leapt to the floor and bowed deeply in respect for the great scientist. He then rose and walked around the study, his tail still wagging. He couldn't believe what a great treasure he had found. Axel, if this note has truly been written by the great Sagnusson himself, then I'm sure it must have some very important secret meaning. He hopped back up onto the stool. We must try to translate and decode it. He looked at the parchment once more. You may be right, Uncle, Axel said with a bit of hesitation, but what is the point of keeping it a secret from future generations, especially if it tells of a useful and worthy discovery? Professor Lindenbrock looked at his nephew. How should I know? Didn't the great scientist Galileo keep secret his discovery of the rings of Saturn for fear of being punished by the authorities? He returned his attention to the scrap of paper. Until I discover the meaning of this note, I will neither eat nor sleep. Axel stared at his uncle in surprise. You, Uncle? Not eat? He said, referring to his uncle's normally huge appetite. Professor thought to himself, did I say no eating? Well, he said, looking directly at Axel, maybe a little snack wouldn't hurt. His thoughts then turned back to the mysterious note. What am I saying? Ignoring his growling stomach, Professor Lindenbrock turned back to the small piece of parchment paper. No, I meant what I said. Until this mystery is solved, no food or sleep for me. Well into the night, the professor and Axel puzzled over the strange message. The pair started out to do what they thought would be the simple job of translating Runic into German. However, the task turned out to be something of a brain teaser. Once Professor Lindenbrock had translated the text, letter for letter, word for word, only gibberish remained. The two tested several different ways of solving the puzzle. They tried grouping the letters together by 2s, then by 3s, then by 4s and 5s. They had no success at all. The professor pawed through a few dictionaries of several different languages, but that was no help either. It seemed this was an unbreakable code. Eventually, the warm light of the sunrise began to pour into the study. The professor jumped down from his stool and began to walk back and forth. He was deep in thought. There had to be an answer to this frustrating puzzle. No matter how long it took, he would not rest until the parchment gave up its secret. No matter how many combinations and methods he had to use, the professor knew he would find the correct one. As he walked, he saw Axel leaning back in his chair, frustrated and tired. Maybe it's time for a break, the professor said to Axel to comfort him. He stopped moving so he could rub his aching eyes. His growling stomach was also telling him it was time for food. When the professor felt some relief in his eyes, he looked back at Axel. He was fanning himself with a secretive piece of parchment. The professor watched as the note swayed back and forth. He saw the front of the paper, then the back, the front, then the back. The light from the lamp on the table lit the paper from behind as it waved in Axel's hand, front, back. The sheet wasn't very thick, so the letters could be seen clearly from the back of the page when some light was behind it, front, back. Staring lazily at the floating page, Professor Lindenbrock noticed something. He was sure he could make some sense out of the jumbled letters, although they were backward from where he stood. The order they were in seemed to form words he could understand. He made out the word descend, front, back. Then he recognized the word crater and snuffles. Front, back, back? The fur on the professor's neck stood up. Back! That was it! It was so simple, but yet so very difficult to put a paw on. I've discovered the secret, the professor cried, out his tail wagging wildly. What is it, Uncle? Axel asked, but he seemed to be pulled from a daydream. Professor Lindenbrock leapt back onto the stool. Axel, dear boy, hold the parchment up to the lamp with the blank side facing you. Axel did as his uncle told him to do, and his eyes widened. Do you see, Axel? Professor said with excitement. He stared at the parchment. Yes, Uncle. Axel replied, the message beginning makes sense now. You have read the note backward. A feeling of complete success washed over the professor's soul. He felt as if he had found the cure for all diseases. He felt as if he had just reached the top of the highest mountain on the planet. There lay the answer, simple as it was, right before his eyes. It was as if Sagnussem's ghost had pointed it out himself. Oh, most clever Sagnussem, the professor said, shaking his head. Turned back to Axel. Hold it up for me, Axel, and I will read it more quickly. The professor leaped onto the table and walked across to where Axel held the parchment next to the lamp. The professor slowly read aloud. Go down into the crater of Snuffles where the shadow of Scartaris touches bold traveler, and you will reach the center of the earth. I did it. Arnu Sagnussem. Professor Lindenbrock had no idea how valuable the book was until that moment. In fact, when he had brought the book the day before, he had no clue that it would point the way to such an incredible journey. If what was written on this piece of parchment was true, and he was certain it was, he could follow the great Sagnussem's path. Then there would be no end to the discoveries he could make. It was as if all of his scientific research and studies over the years had prepared him for and led him to this very moment, this very journey. He had no idea of what wonderful mysteries and treasures lay before him beneath the Earth's surface. One thing was certain, he was going to find out. Nothing could stop him. Professor Lindenbrock leapt off the table and onto the floor. Wonderful, wonderful! He took 3 quick steps and leapt into the air. He spun completely around and landed solidly on all 4 paws. We must start our journey at once, he announced. Axel seemed a bit nervous at the thought. The color was draining from his face. It seemed that he wasn't sharing his uncle's excitement. He swallowed hard as he stood and approached the professor. But, my dear sir, don't you think this note may well be a fake? He asked timidly. The professor tried to ignore Axel's doubt and unnecessary fear. He simply replied, the book in which we have found it is all the proof we need that it is genuine. Axel didn't give up that easily. But, Uncle, what is all this about Snuffles and Scartaris, and I've never heard those names before? Axel said with caution. Professor Lindenbrock couldn't understand why Axel seemed to be so frightened. Why would anyone be afraid to go on such a wonderful expedition? Certainly a journey deep beneath the surface of the earth would have its dangers, but the chances for discoveries must certainly outweigh any hazards by far, whether real or imaginary. Surely as a scientist, his nephew should realize this. But even if Axel didn't understand the many possibilities right away, Professor Lindenbrock knew the journey itself would surely encourage Axel's sense of discovery and adventure along the way. It was clear, however, that his nephew needed to be inspired as well as convinced that the note was real. Professor trotted over to a large globe sitting in a corner of his study and a wooden floor stand. He turned it slowly. Oh, hold on. Ah! Stay together. I have a prop. Sorry, pup. All right, ready? Sit frame. Let's see. I walked over. Okay. Professor Lindenbrock stopped. Hold on. Okay. Trotted over to the large globe sitting in the corner of his study in a wooden floor stand. He turned it slowly with one paw. Pup, you want to do it? You want to do it, pup? You want to try it? Yeah, let's try it. Come on, pups. Come on, puppy. Come on. Oh, you always want to, but now you don't. Come on, pup. Come on. Come on, you gotta help. Come on. Up. Come on. Silly boy. Okay. Oh, just graceful. Okay, ready? Ready, pup? Ready? Hold on. Ready? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You're just gonna be Wishbone. All right. Well, pretend that was real graceful. All right. We're almost done with chapter 2. All right. Professor Lindenbrock stopped the spinning globe right at the spot where Iceland faced the 2 scientists.
Well, we're on America, but sorry. Okay, we'll keep going. You see, dear boy, the cameraman's going to tell me. Okay. You see, dear boy, Snuffles was once an active volcano. Now all that remains is an empty crater at its peak. This inactive volcano is about 5,000 feet high. He then moved his paw to rest under another mountain located next to Snuffles, labeled Scartaris. And here is the mountain called Scartaris, which is much higher than Snuffles, the professor explained. It is close enough that its shadow must fall onto a crack or crater inside the mouth of Snuffles. And it is that crater into which we must descend. Professor Lindenbrock looked up proudly at Axel. We must be off to Iceland, dear nephew, the scientist said as he spun the globe with a flick of his paw. And from there, we went to the center of the earth. Axel swallowed hard. From the nervous look upon his face, it was clear that the professor hadn't completely eased his fears. And that does it for us for chapter 2. And we'll see you next time for chapter 3.